Hello everyone, welcome to Wildwood Studio. I'm Sarah, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I made these 5 wood-burned bookmarks. If you want to make your own, I have a pattern for all of these designs in my online shop, and I've linked the Amazon listing for the blank bookmarks below. The bookmarks I'm using came in a pack of 30 bamboo bookmarks and 32 tassels. I liked these ones because they're a little different from the typical laser-cut basswood ones. The laser-cut shapes are okay too, and the basswood is easier to burn than the bamboo, but they always have that burnt edge, which isn't my favorite look. These bamboo ones feel higher quality, and they were super smooth, so I didn't even have to sand them. For my first bookmark, I started out with this floral design, which you might recognize from my wooden egg video. Since I've never burned on bamboo before, I wanted to start with something straightforward and familiar, and this helped me test how the wood burns without wasting one of the blanks. As always, I used my razor tip wood burning system, and I did this design with my knife tip pen, which worked really well because it cuts through the grain instead of skipping over it. While burning this design, I found that the one downside of bamboo is that it has a pretty unpredictable wood grain. Some parts are super hard while other parts are really soft, and this can cause spots and blotches if you're not careful. For this one, I didn't need to trace the design since I've done it so many times, I just freehanded it. The most difficult part was doing the tight circles with the knife tip pen since the pen doesn't really turn easily mid-line. They don't have to be perfectly round, so it's not a huge deal, but if you're new to wood burning, that's something I'd recommend trying out on a separate piece of wood first. Since this wood grain proved to be a challenge to work with, I decided not to include much shading in these designs unless it's completely dark. If you're a beginner, I suggest sacrificing one bookmark and doing some test lines to get used to how this wood burns before moving on to your final design. The bamboo definitely makes this project a bit of a challenge, but I think it's worth it for how nice they look in the end. Also, this was actually my second attempt at this design because I lost my first one. I had it painted and everything, and it just vanished. I have looked absolutely everywhere and have no idea where it could be, so if you see it, let me know. I wanted to add some color to these bookmarks, and for that I'm using watercolors. Any watercolor you have will do, but I'm using these beam paints that I got for my birthday. They're handmade watercolors made in Manitoulin Island, and I was really excited to try them out. The light blue was more opaque than I expected, which was fine because there wasn't any shading that I could cover up, but it's good to keep that in mind for my other designs. The metallic colors were awesome for this project though. They were translucent enough to show the wood grain through, and they added a really nice effect. Here's my first finished bookmark, and an honorable mention to the one that I lost. Let's move on to the next design. One thing I liked about these bookmark blanks is that they came in 5 different shapes. Since this one was the most square, I thought that a Celtic knot would look nice on it. I transferred the design from my sketchbook using tracing paper, but if you're following along, you can also use carbon paper to transfer the design. With tracing paper, you trace the design twice, one on each side, and then line it up with the wood and scribble over the drawing to transfer it. Carbon paper is a little easier. You just print out the pattern, put the carbon paper underneath it, and trace directly onto the wood. I burned the outline with my knife tip pen again, which once again was good because it cuts across the grain. I've seen some people prefer the ball tip pen for outlines and lettering, but I think that would be a lot more difficult on this material. To add contrast, I burned the background of this design dark, and if you look while I do that, you can probably see what I meant about the different spots burning unevenly. To even it up, I just went over the harder areas again. I used my spoon shader for the larger areas on the end, and my ball tip pen to fill in the smaller spaces. Then I went around the whole design and added a little shadow anywhere the design crossed over itself. This wasn't too difficult despite the material because it's just one straight line with my spoon shader, and it follows the pre-existing lines that I did with my knife tip pen. It is important not to have the heat up too high for this step though. I like to do this to my knot designs because it gives them a nice 3D effect. Afterwards, I went back around with my knife tip pen and added a few little lines in each of those same crossover points. This helps hide any uneven shading, and in my opinion, it also adds some more texture and interest to the overall design, as well as enhancing the 3D effect. If you're interested in more Celtic knot designs, I have a whole bunch on my channel. I'll link a playlist of those below. I considered painting this one, but decided against it. What do you think? Would it look better with paint? I went with a green tassel to add a little color instead. For the next bookmark, I decided to do some monarch butterfly wings. I could have tried to get the whole butterfly on here, but it's a limited space and monarchs are really known for the pattern on their wings, so I thought it would be better to just focus on the pattern. Also, I find butterfly bodies are a little gross anyway. They've got these beautiful wings and then the bodies just remind you that it's still a bug. There is a butterfly house near where I live, and I like to go and look at the butterflies and also enjoy the feeling of being in a garden because it's February in Northern Ontario and it is freezing. Anyway, the first time I went, a butterfly actually landed on my hand, which I always thought would be magical or something, but when I saw its little legs on my fingers and its bug body, I couldn't help flinch and it flew away. I think it told all its friends because I haven't had another one land on me since that first time. I thought this design would work well because I could just burn the dark parts black and then paint the rest of the pattern and avoid any need for smooth shading. I used the knife tip pen again for most of the outline, but I did switch to my ball tip pen for the smaller circles because they were too tight for the knife tip. That bit of the outline turned out a bit blotchy, but it's okay because I'm going to burn right up next to it so you won't notice in the end. Then I burned the black parts of the design dark with my ball tip pen. After I was done burning, I used this sand eraser to erase the pencil lines. I'll link to it below if you want to get a couple for yourself. They're meant for pen, but they are way better than a regular eraser at removing pencil from wood. For this design, I used some of my other watercolors for the white, red, and orange parts because I have a limited palette with the beam ones. Then I layered the beam bronze and gold on top of the colors to keep the metallic theme going, and I really like how that turned out. This is another design I've done before, so you might recognize the steps if you've seen my other videos. I transferred it from my sketchbook using tracing paper and then used my knife tip pen to outline it. For this one, I didn't do a smooth outline except for the stem because it needs to look feathery around the edges, so I did a choppy outline with each pen stroke pointing down on an angle towards the center line of the feather. For the shading, I went back over it with my spoon shader in the same direction as the strands. This was a bit tricky because of the grain, but it just requires a little patience and a steady hand. Also, not putting your temperature up too high to speed things up, that's part of the patience. To get this effect, I put the spoon shader down so that the line is thick at first, and then lean it towards the edge of the spoon as I do my line so that it tapers to a point. This is something else you might want to practice on your sacrificial test bookmark if you're not used to it. Then I used my sand eraser again to clear off the pencil lines. Sometimes eraser shavings get caught in the burning. That happens with all erasers, so I just use a stiff paintbrush to clean them out. Once again, I added color with my fancy new paints. The light blue was a little too opaque for this because of the shading, so I had to wipe some of that off. That's another thing I like about watercolor, is that you can reactivate it with water and wipe some of it off to lighten it. I used the metallic colors again, and I really love how they look. I did a gradient from blue to bronze, and I'm really happy with it. After painting, I felt like the design overall needed a little more contrast, so I added an outline to the bookmark, and I think it looks way better. I also went back around the feather and darkened the burning a bit. I technically burned over the paint, which I would not recommend, but I think it also made it look a lot better. My last design is an outdoor scene with a wolf howling at the moon. I've always wanted to do one of these silhouette burnings. I think they look really cool, but I tend to go for the more complicated subjects in my larger burnings, so I thought this was a good time to finally try it out. I outlined the design with my knife tip pen and filled in the dark spots with my spoon shader for the larger areas and my ball tip pen for the more tight spaces. I had to get my smoke extractor out for this one when I did the foreground because it was creating a decent amount of smoke. I use a razor tip razor mini smoke extractor, but most of the time I find it's not necessary because I don't burn hot enough to make much smoke. So I only use the smoke extractor when I'm doing really dark areas. As always, I have links to all my equipment in the description of the video. For the moon, I thought I was going to try shading in the crater texture on its surface, but after doing this little blotchy outline with my ball tip pen, I decided to just add it with paint. For the color, I did the moon white with my regular watercolors and then added metallic blue shadows to the crater parts of the moon and a dark blue to the rest of the sky. This design was actually the fastest of all of them, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. To protect the bookmarks, I use this Varathane Outdoor Diamond Wood finish. If you can't find this exact finish, just look for something that's water-based with UV protection. It's also really important that it's a spray-on finish because a brush-on one would definitely smudge the watercolors. Then I just added the tassels and they were done. In the end, this project took me 6 hours and 45 minutes to burn, and all 5 of these bookmarks are now available in my online shop at wildwoodstudio.ca. Or you can get the blanks and the pattern using the links in the description and follow along with the video to make your own. Here's a picture of all 5 bookmarks. Let me know which one's your favorite in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you haven't already and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss all my future art videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.